I have almost complete disdain for millennials because I hate working with them because I found so many of them to be arrogant. I found so many of them to be lazy or entitled. They think they know everything already.
Hey everybody, welcome to Bus Call, the podcast dedicated to the touring industry professionals and their stories. My name is Ryan Goldbacher and I'm going to be your host. In these interviews, we're going to break down how touring professionals got into the industry, advice they have for up-and-comers, and awesome stories from the road. For more info, visit us at show-logistics.com and click on the Bus Call podcast at the top of the page. Don't believe me, please, she's already shown me all of her tattoos. Alright, my next guest on Bus Call is Thomas O'Keefe. Thomas has had a long career. He's worked with Luster, Whiskeytown, Ryan Adams, Anti-Scene. He tour managed Train for years, Third Eye Blind, Sia, and he currently tour manages Weezer. He's also the author of Waiting to Derail, Ryan Adams, and Whiskeytown Alt Country's brilliant train wreck. Thomas, welcome to Bus Call. How's it going, man?
Good. How you doing?
Not bad. So what's the story behind how you got into the music business? Where did it all start for you? And what series of events led you to be a tour manager?
Well, I was, when I bought my first Kiss record in 1976, and that kind of ended that, that kind of ended the possibility of any other career. I always wanted to play in a band, and then I played in a punk rock band from Charlotte called Anti-Scene for many years. And the truth was, I was the tour manager of Anti-Scene, and I didn't realize it because, when you're in a band, a small band like that, you don't have any crew, barely. We had a merch guy who went with us, but that was about it. And I was the guy in my band who said, hey, we better leave. It's 12 hours to Albuquerque or whatever. And so what it inevitably ended up happening was our drummer in Anti-Scene started another band on the side called Luster, Lustre. And they wanted me to be the bass player. And I was like, I wanted to do it. There was just no way I could. It was just too much. I was still in Anti-Scene. I was working. And so I declined the job. And about 2 months later, Luster was about to get a record deal. This was about 1994 or so. And I was so bummed out and depressed. I was like, I blew it. That was my chance, And then Luster was in the group of bands. Around 93, 94, the record companies had switched all over to grunge rock, and they had already signed all the existing bands. So they went out on a second signing binge, and they signed every single band that was even slightly alternative rock. And some of these bands had just barely started and were just barely getting going. And Luster was one of those bands. So they ended up calling me late 95, early 96 to be their tour manager. So I went ahead and quit playing in Anti-Scene. I started being their tour manager. And I quickly realized that it was what I had been doing all along. And then Luster got dropped 6 months later. And now 25 years later, I still have a job. So the joke is with the Luster guys is I'm the only one that got a career out of their band. So 25 years later, I still have that same job. So in a way, it was good that I didn't end up playing in the band.
Well, it's funny how that kind of stuff works out because I was an audio engineer before I started tour managing and made it a career too. So what's the story behind working with Ryan Adams and the Whiskeytown gig?
Well, the only reason I got that job was proximity and location. What happened was Whiskeytown was a band from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I lived in Raleigh. I had moved to Raleigh to do the Luster job. And then when Luster got dropped or Luster ended at the late fall, early winter of 96, I went back to delivering pizzas. And I quickly discovered that your first job in this business is not the hardest one to get. Your second job is the hardest one to get. And the reason for that is your first job somebody gives you. Your second job you have to go out and earn. But the problem is you have to go earn the job based on what you did during the first job. So when I was calling around trying to find a tour manager job in the winter of 96, I was like, oh, I'm the tour manager of Lester. Well, Lester didn't sell any records. They got dropped. So that doesn't mean anything. And when you grow up and you start to work for bands people have heard of, then you can go, oh, I'm the tour manager of Weezer. And they go, oh, okay, and then you're taken seriously. So I struggled looking for that second job. And I got a job working for D-Generation, who ended up being one of the 2 or 3 favorite bands that I worked with in my career. I loved them as a fan, and I'm still remain friends with them to this day. But Whiskey Town was a band from Raleigh, and I didn't know them, even though I lived there. Their manager lived in Austin, Texas, and they really needed somebody on the ground in Raleigh, mostly for babysitting duties, because they couldn't get Ryan up out of bed at 3 p.m. to do phone interviews. They needed somebody to go bang on his door. So I got a phone call. The reason they called me was because they wanted somebody that lived in Raleigh. So had I lived in Charlotte or somewhere else, I probably wouldn't have gotten that job.
Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time. I mean,
exactly.
I got that tour manager gig because I was standing in the room and somebody thought I was somebody else. And
right.
And it ended up just working out, really good. That was my first real tour managing gig with Shooter Jennings, and it just was being in the right place at the right time. And
right. When I was out with Whiskey Town, Train opened for us once in September of 1998. Mm-hmm. And when I ended up getting the Train job, a year, like barely 14 months later, the drummer of Train, Scott Underwood, who is still my buddy, said, hey, man, don't you remember how nice you were to us that day? And I was like, no, I don't remember that. But I ended up working for 13 years with that band before I quit. And so, the advice is be nice to the opening band. Be nice to everybody, because you truly never know where your next job is going to come from. I could give you your next job, or you could give me my next job. You never know.
Yeah, that happens all the time. Doing all the punk rock stuff that I've done over the years, they'll cram like 3 bands in front of the opening act in a tiny little club, and the guys that were always the busiest after the tour were the tour managers and the crew that was up on stage helping the opening acts tear down their gear, or whatever they could do extra to kind of make buddies with them, and then they keep working after that.
Yeah, that's where you never know. You really never know. Anti-Scene played a show, and I remember Anti-Scene playing a show in Philadelphia when I was still in the band in the mid-90s, and Helmet opened up for us. Mm-hmm. You just never know. I remember Train playing a show in Birmingham, Alabama in 2001, and John Mayer was there with an acoustic guitar and a tuner. Mm-hmm. And he said, what time should I play? And I said, you can start anytime you want, as long as you're done at 8:45. And he was like, okay,
I have a story about how I kind of blew it. I did a run with Chris Stapleton before he blew up, and I just wasn't into the gig. I didn't act like I wanted to be there, and I don't know if I missed out on that gig or not, but, they didn't call me back to do it, and I'm kicking myself now. Not that I've got any regrets, but it's just, you never know where a gig's going to come from.
You really never know. You really never know.
Even if it doesn't come from that artist, if you make friends with management or, other people on the team, you never know when they're going to call you and say, hey, can you do this?
Yeah, you don't need to be a dick to anybody. Save being a dick for when you need it, when someone's trying to screw you over. But
if you're a dick for no reason, people won't take you seriously when you actually do mean it. So what's the story behind Train? I mean, you got on pretty early with that gig, right about when Meet Virginia came out, and they really started getting some traction.
Oh yeah, 100%. The funny thing was, in 1999, I proposed to my wife, and we had our wedding slated for October of 1999, and I made a commitment at that point that I was not really going to go out much in 99. I was going to kind of take it easy. I didn't want to be the guy who was gone all year, and then I flew home for my wedding and immediately left. Mm. So I was very particular about what I did in 99. And quite honestly, at that time, I was also running a small management company. We managed Whiskey Town because Ryan had fired their previous manager that hired me. So we had that going too. So I got offered the Train gig around the summer of 99, and I turned it down. By coincidence, the same day, I was at a festival in Raleigh, and the Marvelous Three's singer Butch Walker was trying to hire me to do the Marvelous Three, which is a band I, as you know, because we toured together with them, I loved that band a lot. And I couldn't do either because, you know, my wedding was approaching, and like I said, I didn't want to be gone the whole year. So after my wedding, I went out with Mandy Moore by coincidence, who was you know, a teenager at the time, but she would Ryan Adams was living in my house, and I was out on tour with Mandy Moore, having no idea years later that I would be he would marry her, you know. After I got married and I went back out with Mandy, then the train job came back around again. Do you want to do it now? And I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I started with them in the fall, like October of '99, and I did it all the way until like fall 2012. So it was 13 years nearly.
So you currently tour manage Weezer, and I know Weezer's on Crush, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You got, I mean, a lot of the artists that we've worked with together have been through Crush, and that's why it's important to really get a good relationship going with management, because, you know, they're going to call you for their other artists. Keep the friendships there, and things will keep coming. So what's I mean, you and I, you were working with Crush doing management with Striking Matches in Nashville, and that's how we met. I tour managed Striking Matches and did audio for them, and then later on you ended up becoming Weezer's tour manager. So how did that happen?
Same thing, you know, exactly what you just said. You know, after Train, I worked at Crush. Crush had an office here in Nashville for about a year and a half, and I worked there, and then they closed their Nashville operation down. So I found myself unemployed for a minute, and then Crush called me and immediately wanted me to tour manage Sia when there was just a few things. We did SNL and Ellen and the Grammys and a few things like that, like a lot of TV show stuff.
Some little stuff.
Little tiny stuff like SNL, yeah. It was fun. Yeah. I mean, it's actually pretty easy because it lasts all week long. You can't do anything else.
Yeah.
But so we did that. Then I went out with Third Eye Blind and Dashboard Confessional for the summer, and then they called me about Weezer and who's Crush manages, and of course I said yes, because Weezer has always been one of my favorite bands. And I
remember you telling me that way before that even was on the radar. You're like, man, that's one of my favorite bands. It's kind of my dream to tour manage Weezer.
You know, I always wanted to, when I quit tour managing Train and it seemed like I wasn't going to be doing it again, the one thing that bummed me out was I had never toured. I always wanted to tour manage a band that I liked from when I was a kid. And the reason for that is I felt like the whole thing would come full circle, you know. Now, I was a Weezer fan in 1994. I saw them in 90. Me, my wife, and the singer of the band, Seven Mary 3, went to go see them in Raleigh on Pinkerton in early 97. But I wasn't a kid. You know what I mean? I would have been 30. But if Cheap Trick calls, I might have to quit Weezer and go do Cheap Trick. But other than that, you know, I'm very happy where I am. I've been with Weezer for nearly 5 years now.
So, you know, we get to go to a lot of cool places and see a lot of cool things. What are the coolest countries you've actually gotten to go to?
Well, you know, it's kind of funny because I rarely go anywhere I haven't been before, you know, because basically we all go to North America, South America, Europe, Japan, Asia, Australia. So that's kind of it. Like, so I went to Portugal last year, which I had never been there before. But other than that, I mean, there's a lot of places in the world that I love, you know. I mean, I love the French-Italian Riviera part of the world. I love Sydney, Australia. I love some cities in America that I would rather go to more than others. London is great. Paris is great. I mean, Buenos Aires, Argentina is great. Tokyo is great. You know, the thing with the Weezer guys is Weezer had been to Japan when I started with them. I've been to Japan with Weezer twice, and those guys have been there 10 or 12 or 15 times. Like, it's pretty crazy because the band's very popular there and they go there a lot, you know. I mean, our singer speaks Japanese. Those guys, I mean, a couple of those guys go to Japan on vacation. You know, they love Japan, but they had hardly been to Australia. Weezer's only been to Australia 2 or 3 times in their whole career. Now, Train was the opposite. I've been to Australia with Train a dozen times, but I'd only been to Japan once with Train before. So I've only been to Japan 3 times in my whole career. And Weezer's only been to Australia 3 or 4 times in their whole career. So it's kind of the opposite. But it's kind of weird how some bands are popular in some countries and some are popular in other countries. But yeah, no, I love going to Australia. I love going to Tokyo. I love coming home to Nashville. Mm-hmm. And the downside to it is for every one cool place you go to, there's probably a dozen Toledo, Ohio, Youngstown, San Antonio, Texas in the summer. And I remember my punk rock band playing in Poland in '93, and I was just like, oh my God, we're starving to death. There's no food here. I mean, it's just, people always say to me, it seems like you have a really cool job. And I said, you're exactly right. It seems like I have a really cool job.
Mm-hmm. There's so many good things about what we do, and then there's always that one time where you can't get in touch with the person you've been looking for 4 hours, and somebody doesn't make bus call, somebody misses a flight, and that's the unfun part of it all.
Right. You're laying in your hotel room in Sydney, Australia at 3 a.m. asleep, and your phone's ringing off the hook because you're going on tour in the U.S., in 2 weeks, and everyone's calling you, and they are not aware that there's a 12-hour time difference.
Or they don't care.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can't shut your phone off. That's the problem.
No.
This job is, especially tour managing, this job, and really for everybody, this job is an all or nothing job. You can't halfway do it.
Oh, yeah. You're on the clock 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Exactly.
There's no break.
That's right.
What is one of the coolest venues you've gotten to play?
I would say, Train played, Weezer played Madison Square Garden last year, which was pretty awesome. Train's played the Greek Theater in Taormina, Sicily, overlooking an erupting volcano, in a Colosseum. It looks like the Roman Colosseum, but it's like 500 years older. We've all done Red Rocks and all these different, which I don't really care. Everyone's always loves to talk about Red Rocks. I can't agree with that. It's so high up, and
it looks cool. It really looks cool, but it's such a pain in the ass from our perspective. I mean, you got to.
Yeah, that's true.
You got to cross load all your trucks, and nothing can get up that hill, and
that's exactly right.
The show part's great, and it's a cool venue, but it's just a mess. I'd way rather do anything anywhere else.
Yeah, it's pretty terrible. I mean, it's great. It's great to see it, but it's not fun to actually be there.
If you can do it as a fly date, that's the way to do it. But if you're on tour, it's just not fun. But,
right, it's miserable.
What's the craziest thing that's ever happened to you on tour that you can tell?
That's a good one. I mean, I've never left anybody behind. I've gotten grease spotted myself before, but just from like the hotel to the venue sort of thing. I don't know. I mean, it's probably nothing I can tell.
That's the hard part.
That's the hard part.
The stories you can tell are incredible, or you can't tell are awesome. But
there's a lot of great stories I could tell, but I'd like to keep my house, and not get sued.
Yeah.
So it's the thing is, when you're doing this with baby bands. You're doing this with baby bands, and that's when you are dealing with children and dealing with, the young 20-something dude who's, out drinking or chasing girls or doing whatever they're doing. And the stakes aren't as high. You know what I mean? You're just playing a 200-seat club. There's 50 people there. You're collecting $500. You're rounding them up, and you're all sleeping on the floor of a Super 8 somewhere, and you're in a Sprinter van, and you drive to the next city. The hardest part of a tour like that is waking everybody up and getting them in the van at 8 o'clock in the morning when you have a long drive that day. But at a bigger level, there's way more moving pieces and way more pieces of the puzzle, but typically the bands at that level, almost exclusively are grown-up adults. So that the babysitting component of it sort of vanishes, and you end up being able to concentrate on the things that you need to concentrate on. If you're at a rock concert and there's 10,000 people there, you have to think of all 10,000 of those people, not just your 4 band members or not just your 20 crew. I mean, everyone's there. If there's a thunderstorm coming, you're thinking about everyone's well-being, not just the band and crew. So as this thing gets bigger, the stakes get harder and the job becomes harder, but the ridiculous parts of it sort of tend to go away, at least to some extent.
Well, and there's also a lot more help.
Yeah, and there's a lot more help. Yeah, you go like, how could you ride around with that little baby band with you and a sound person, but then you go out on tour with a big band and you have, I mean, we have a skeleton crew, I think, and it's not that many people, but I mean, some of these bands go out and they have 100 people with them or 75 or 100 people with them by the time you count all the bus drivers and truck drivers and just, there's just a massive amount of people on tours like that. Yeah. So
what's some advice you have for people that are up and coming through this business? What kind of positions should they put themselves in to do well, and what things should they avoid? What attitudes should they avoid?
My wife always uses this quote. She says, know your audience. Imagine if you are trying to get a job and I'm the person hiring you. I'm 56 years old. I'm an old Gen Xer. I am not a millennial and I'm not a Gen Z. I'm a very old Gen Xer, the oldest range of it. I have almost complete disdain for millennials because I hate working with them, because I found so many of them to be arrogant. I found so many of them to be lazy or entitled. They think they know everything already. And so if you're trying to get a job from me, you need to realize that I'm not a millennial. So I'm not going to be interested in you texting me during our talk or doing all these millennial antics where you want to advance a show via some internet portal. I would never do that, and I just think that you have to understand that I want to hire the kid who was me when I was 20. I want to hire the kid who has that evil ambition glowing in his eyes. I want to hire the kid who tried way harder than everyone else. I want to hire the kid who did things without me having to tell him to do it. I want to hire the kid who worked harder than anyone else. I mean, I've been at shows before where I've taken the runner's name and gone, dude, if you ever want to come out, call me.
Yeah.
It takes me seconds to see these qualities in a person.
Well, yep, and it's got nothing to do with your age or anything like that. It's got everything
has nothing to do with your
right. Your attitude.
It just has to do with work ethic, and it has to do with because that's what I did. The hardest thing I think about this job is acquiring your second job, because your first job someone gives you, your second job you have to go get, but you don't have any name recognition.
Yeah.
You're going to struggle to get that second job. And I used to make dozens of phone calls per day just trying to get that second job. I was calling random people. I was calling people that I didn't even know and saying, hey, man, blah, 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 blah. Some people, there was a girl that I know at Columbia Records who I called her so many times, she didn't even realize that she didn't know me. But I was determined to get that second job. That is what it takes. You have to have that kind of determination in order to get the second job, and that's what people like me are looking for.
Yeah.
We're not looking for entitlement.
I remember I actually, I went to Full Sail, which is the biggest ripoff in the world.
Well, no, I had one of my longest crew members that has ever worked with me went to Full Sail.
Oh yeah. I don't mean it in the sense that it's necessarily a bad education. I think there's better educations out there, but it's so much money, and they rack people up with so much debt. And the people that are successful out of there would have been successful wherever they went
anyway,
to school.
Right.
But I came out of school, moved to Nashville. I got my internship at Blackbird, and I genuinely thought that I was going to be so good at this that they were going to fire their assistant engineers and hire me. And I was so wrong.
Right.
The entire time I was there. I mean, I worked really, really hard, but I was arrogant and an idiot at the time. And, I had to get put in my place to kind of realize, all right, I got a lot to learn. I think of it like a punk rock education, and I bring that up a lot. But most of the successful people that I have worked with in this business didn't go to school per se. They might have gone to some kind of audio course or something like that for a couple months, but they really just got themselves out there. And if they wanted to tour, they asked to be the person that drove the van, or they sold merch, or they did whatever they had to do to get their foot in the door. And then other things came from that. And like in your case, you played in the band and then you became the tour manager, and that's the path that worked for you, but it's not the path for everybody. I mean, I know people that can't play an instrument at all that do this for a living.
Right. I had a guitar tech with train for 12, 13 years that wasn't a guitar player. I never met a guitar tech who wasn't a guitarist.
Yeah. There's so many opportunities to learn, and people in this business want to share their knowledge if you want to learn.
Well, there's the end period where you get older. There's the period of time where you get your job, and then you work your career, and then you earn your money, and you do what you do. And then as you get older, becomes the mentoring part.
Exactly.
If you watch that movie Wall Street, at the end of the movie, Michael Douglas is standing in Central Park with his protege guy who turned on him. And he said, when I looked at you, I saw myself. Mm-hmm. Once you've reached the point where you've done well in life, you want to go and help the kid who reminds you of you. Mm-hmm. But if I'm a Gen Xer, I want that kid is not an entitled millennial. Mm-hmm. That kid is somebody who breaks that mold and is very ambitious but willing to do the work. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're always looking for.
Yeah. Yep. Because nobody's above having to work their ass off in this business. I absolutely agree with you on all that stuff. So, yeah. So, tell me about Waiting to Derail.
Waiting to Derail is a book I wrote. It's on Amazon. It covers the period of time of the Whiskey Town, Ryan's first band, the album cycle for the Stranger's Almanac album. And that goes from basically spring of 97 to the book ends in fall of 2000. So it covers about a 3.5 year period. The book essentially starts the day that I get the job, and the book ends when the band is over and we all move on. And the reason that I use that timeline is because that was what I saw. The Whiskey Town had put out 2 albums before I started with them, and there's essentially nothing in the book about those albums. Because I didn't see it, I wanted to concentrate just on the period of time that I lived and saw and remember. And my memory is really, 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 really spot on, almost to a point of being ridiculous. I can tell you that I saw Journey on October 20th, 1981, the first time, I mean, it's just ridiculous. My ability to remember dates and places is definitely way high up in the top percentiles of people that can do that. So I didn't want to waste it, and I wasn't drunk. I was there the whole time, and I'm the one that drove the van, so I remember the whole story. And I feel like it was an important story because, I felt like Ryan is an important artist. Now, of course, keep in mind this book was written and already out for 6 months, 8 months before the whole news about him broke. And so it's seen through the lens of before that happened. And of course the book sort of slowed down immediately once the bad news about him came out. But, I think Ryan is one of the most important artists of the last 10 years for sure. Mm-hmm. And a genius in a very crazy genius songwriting sort of way. And really the book is essentially the story of this young genius, because when I was with him, he was in his early 20s. And the handful of people who first figured it out. So I knew Ryan was a genius in 1997. Mm-hmm. So it's not a surprise to me that his career, the bad stuff that happened with him was obviously a surprise to me, but him becoming successful as he has is not a surprise to me.
Mm-hmm. And where can people pick up that book and you donate all the profits, is that right? Yeah,
I'm donating my profits from the book to a women's shelter in Raleigh. The story came from Raleigh, so I figured whatever money the book makes should go back to where it came from, sort of. Mm-hmm. But, the book's on Amazon, and it's out there, and I think it's a great it's a great rock music book for anybody that likes any kind of rock music, not just necessarily you have to be a Ryan Adams fan to enjoy the book. You know, Ryan's a genius and he's a jackass, you know, and you kind of see both sides of it, but you really do get a feeling for what it's like to be out on tour and riding around in the RV or on the bus or in the van or whatever we rode in. And I wrote the book with a guy named Joe A. Strike, who coincidentally, Joe A. Strike was in a band, or is in a band called Watershed, and they got signed around the same time Luster did. They were also in that same sort of signing bonanza, like in the early 90s when the labels were signing every alternative rock band they could find. Watershed's a great band, one of my favorites, and he is the singer of that band. And Joe's written a couple books. He wrote a book about his band Watershed called Hitless Wonder. That's an amazing book, and I would highly recommend it. But yeah, me and Joe worked together on this book, and it took a while, but we did it.
Well, I'm going to put a link in the show notes so people can take a look at the book and buy it if they want to, but it's a really good read. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've gotten through the first couple chapters, and you know, it's just interesting to see the whole growth of everything, and especially from the perspective of somebody that was in the middle of it all. So
most of all the Ryan fans that have read it, they're all like mad when it's over, because they're like, I read this book in one day. I read this book on one flight. I read this book in 6 hours. You know, I didn't want it to be over, you know, that kind of thing.
Well,
it's definitely quick. You know, it's not a slow book at all. You definitely plow through it pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, hey, Thomas, thank you for doing this, man. And when all this COVID stuff's over, we'll have to hang out a little more, because
yeah, we'll try. Yep,
I'm going stir crazy here.
I think we all are.
Hey, everybody, thanks for listening to Bus Call. If you like the podcast, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit us at patreon.com/buscall. Patreon members will get the podcast a week before it's released to the public, and they can also sign up to have advance notice of who's going to be on and the opportunity to ask questions. Please take some time to visit show-logistics.com. We've dedicated the first page to sell merch to raise money for Crew Nation's Global Relief Fund. As you know, with COVID-19, basically all touring has stopped for the foreseeable future, and there's thousands and thousands of crew out of work, and we're donating all the profits, many of the merch sold there, straight to Crew Nation. Thanks so much again, and please rate, review, and subscribe.